Today we're going to finish up Chapter 8, The Trouble Over Taxes. Just starting with a quick review from yesterday. George Grenville, he was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and he needed money because Britain went in debt over the French and Indian War. So he came up with this idea to tax the colonists. And King George III, he said, great idea, let's do it. Let's tax those colonists living in America. So they passed the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act, remember, put a tax on anything that had printed words on paper, such as legal documents, newspapers, even playing cards. And boy, did that make the colonists mad. They didn't want to give money to Great Britain when they didn't even live there anymore. So along came this guy, Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was that lawyer from Virginia who was a really good speaker, and he inspired Americans to begin to protest against Great Britain and their taxes. Another colonist was Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams had some great ideas to lead protests too. He began a group called the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty was a secret group. They didn't want to get caught by any of the soldiers of Great Britain. And they began to lead protests to try and scare away the Stamp Act agents and to lead protests throughout the colonies to get Great Britain to stop trying to tax them. Well, it worked. And so Great Britain stopped the Stamp Act or repealed it. And that's where we left off. Well, Great Britain wasn't finished yet. They still needed money. So they came up with another idea, and it was called the Townshend Acts. In your notebook, write again what is underlined. So the Townshend Acts was another tax that they came up with. But now they were going to put a tax on anything that the colonists imported to their country. That means they bought it from other countries and brought it into the colonies. These were things like paper, because the colonies didn't really have paper mills yet where they could make their own paper. Another thing they put taxes on were wool, and they used wool to make a lot of their clothes with. And the worst thing of all was to put a tax on tea. The colonists really, really loved drinking tea. So it'd be kind of like in America today, if let's say you really love drinking Mountain Dew, and all of a sudden they put a tax on Mountain Dew, and you had to pay a lot of extra money every time you drank that Mountain Dew. Well, the colonists came up with an idea. They decided that they would boycott paper and wool and tea. Now, boycott down at the bottom of the page means they're not going to buy these things. Even though they really like them, they're just not going to buy them. And if they don't buy them, then they don't have to pay the tax on them. But it was so hard for them to give up their tea. Another group that started at this time was the Daughters of Liberty. Now, just like the Sons of Liberty, they were a secret group. And these women decided they wanted to help. They thought, if the men are going to help, we want to be part of this too. So they joined the Daughters of Liberty. And here's how they helped. They decided to start brewing their own tea, to make their own tea. And they tried to grow tea and use the tea leaves to make tea. And you know what? It was terrible. But they tried. They also decided to weave their own wool and cloth because they had sheep in the colonies. So they would use the wool from the sheep, and they began to make clothes that we could buy here in the colonies that weren't going to have a tax on them. And so they helped by making tea and by making clothes where you wouldn't have to pay taxes on it. Well, the colonists, they were really starting to make Great Britain mad. It was like the colonists just wouldn't go away. Everything Great Britain had an idea to start, the colonists were able to protest and not do. So Great Britain decided to teach those colonists a lesson. They sent a whole fleet of warships into the harbors of major cities like New York and Boston to show that they were powerful. And they wanted to show those pesky Americans that they should just start to behave themselves. If you look at the picture down here, this was a painting someone did at the harbor in Boston and all of the warships sitting out there. Imagine if you were an American and looked out and saw all those powerful ships. Great Britain had one of the strongest navies in the whole world. And to see those ships out there with cannons pointing towards them, it was kind of scary. But you can see that through this chapter, the Americans aren't ready to back down yet. This is the beginning of our country and the beginning of the Revolutionary War.